Now, there's another hopeful point here, but it comes from the situation in terms of bank abuses being revealed to be even worse than we thought. And that is that we are seeing some more momentum in Congress as a result of a 300-page report that came out earlier this week when the Senate Subcommittee on Investigation found that JP Morgan Chase had ignored its own risk assessments and stonewalled regulators, and in fact later changed its risk assessments to give license to its bad behavior that eventually led to the warnings that resulted in a $6 billion loss last year on one trading position. $6 billion loss in the London in the London investment office that is now a trader that is now known as the London Whale for the size of the trades that he was involved in. Now, some of the officials from JP Morgan Chase faced some tough questioning on the Senate Select Committee on Investigation from the chairman of that subcommittee, Senator Levin, who recently announced that he's going to be retiring, the senior senator from the state of Michigan. And Senator Levin was speaking with Peter Weiland, the former head of market risk, who basically admitted that the portfolio was growing at a much rapider rate than they had admitted to regulators. Here's what Senator Levin asked him, and how Peter Weiland answered.
Mr. Weiland, since the January and February, the SCP wasn't decreasing, as the CIO told the OCC on January 30th. It was increasing. Is that correct? And Ms. Drew has already indicated that. Do you agree with that? It was increasing?
Yes, they were purchasing long positions.
But the portfolio was also increasing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Senator Levin went on to get Peter Weiland, the former head of market risk at JP Morgan Chase, to admit that, in fact, the bank's original assessments, the bank's original warnings, internal warnings about the risks that these investments posed were correct. Here's how he put it.
Mr. Weiland, the bank's quantitative experts said the portfolio's comprehensive risk measurement, or CRM number, shot up to $6 billion in large part because its portfolio shot up in size. I understand that you had questions about that explanation at the time. Do you now believe that the analysts had it right, especially since the portfolio actually did lose $6.2 billion in a year? You now acknowledge that they got it right?
Yes, I acknowledge that now, with all the information we have today, that was correct.
Of course, Senator Levin basically euphemized that, but in fact, Peter Weiland at the time called his own internal risk assessment garbage. Garbage, that's what he called it. And here he was forced to eat his own words and admit that basically they had ignored their own warnings. Of course, according to their own original regulations, apparently JP Morgan Chase violated 5 of its own risk measures some 330 times. Then, with the cooperation of top management, they changed their risk assessment measures so that they could proceed with these large trades. Then, for a period of weeks, they basically stopped reporting to the Office of the Comptroller of Currency at the behest of the Chief Investment Officer, Ina Drew, and certainly with the approval and acknowledgement of the CEO, Jamie Dimon, who has been lauded as the sort of only head of a large Wall Street firm to have survived the economic crash relatively intact as an adept risk manager. This certainly tarnishes his reputation and the ability of these firms to be trusted at all or work on good faith. And in fact, it also raises questions about the Office of the Comptroller of Currency. If they weren't reporting to them for weeks, was this an issue that other higher level regulators or the Department of Justice needed to be alerted to? And if they were underreporting, which we now believe they were underreporting their losses until the final numbers came through, was that something that the Office of the Comptroller of Currency should have been aware of? Another interesting development in that hearing, Senator John McCain, again, Republicans coming through here, getting tough on the banks. Senator McCain had his own questions. He basically said, what do you mean you didn't know if this was being reported, if this had to be reported to the Office of the Comptroller of Currency or not? What do you mean? Is JP Morgan Chase such a large firm that you didn't even know? Well, It may be not such a large firm that a top officer like Peter Weiland didn't know that that was standard operating procedure. But certainly, as we've seen, it is such a large firm that it is immune from the kinds of scrutiny and criminal prosecution and regulation that it would perhaps be subject to if it were a smaller sized bank and it did not endanger the economy as much to go after them with vigor. That's why I'm hoping, and many other progressive critics are hoping, that this leads to greater action on the issue of ending too big to fail and give Senator Sherrod Brown and Senator David Vitter some good headwinds. Coming up next, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Conservative Political Action Conference and Donald Trump's speech there. Boy, his shtick doesn't get old. Stay tuned for that next on Take Action News.